was one afternoon on the farm in North Carolina. My brother and I, we were in elementary school, climbed up on the fencing around the hog lot where there were two big pigs laying in the mud. And we picked up pebbles and we began to toss them over at the animals. And my Uncle Charlie saw and he reacted, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, we're just throwing rocks at the pigs." He said, "You don't do that. These animals are not here for your sport." And then about a week later, Uncle Charlie and a couple of neighbor men killed the pigs, dressed them, and cured them for meat. And at that time, I remember telling my brother, "I can't understand what is so wrong with tossing pebbles at pigs," when Uncle Charlie knew he was going to kill them a week later. He killed them, isn't that worse? We were just throwing stones. You know, I was grown before I realized what my Uncle Charlie meant. I remember the faces of Charlie Forbes and his neighbors when they were killing those hogs, dressing them and curing the meat. I mean, they were very serious. It was a sober business. It was a ritual. They didn't talk. The meat would feed the families through the long winter. We were tossing pebbles at pigs. There is a world of difference. I think about this story every once in a while, about the level at which people engage life. Either a game, thumping stones, or something almost like sanctuary business. Now, my uncle was a little harsh, I believe, with his niece and nephew. We were just thumping rocks to get the pigs to move. But maybe he was a little harsh because all of us at one level engage even serious things as though they were a game or a sport. I thought about this week in conjunction with our stories of the bishop's candlesticks, of Jesus in the desert. The central word in our stories is temptation. And so if I were to gather any group around and we were to sit together and I would say, "Well, friends, today the subject is temptation," there would be a lot of giggling and laughing and nudging one another, and someone would probably quote Oscar Wilde, "I can resist anything but temptation." And someone would tell about a time when they were mischievous and dropped a water balloon at a ball game and hit somebody. They would say, "Ooh, the devil made me do it." Someone would tell about a morning waking up with dark skies and blowing snow. "I think I'll just pull the covers over my head. I'm not going to work today. I'll just sleep in." Someone else would talk about the time going to a restaurant, and after a very nice meal, here comes the waiter with the dessert cart. There is German chocolate cake, Dutch apple pie, baked Alaska. "Get thee behind me, Satan." Well, what do you think? Well, I don't know. Well, maybe just this time. The subject is temptation, and the discussion is chocolate cake. But there will be someone sitting in that group who doesn't feel amused, because when you say temptation, they take it to another level. She says, "My best friend's going with his family to Disneyland. They're going to leave on Thursday night for Florida. And they've invited me to go, which means I'll miss Friday and Monday at school. But what am I going to say to my teacher? I'm going to Disneyland? So I think I'll say to my teacher, my grandmother's having surgery and we have to go." Well, she has a good time at Disneyland. And then on Tuesday, she's in the cafeteria telling her friends about what a great time they had, and the teacher walks by. She says, "How's your grandmother, dear?" "What?" "How's your grandmother?" "Oh, she's all right." And she thinks she got away with it. The teacher walks on by, and the others that are listening are holding their breath. Well, her friends go off to class, and she gets up and she starts down the hall, and she's not really feeling very good. Because if I do this now, will it get easier with even bigger lies? "Yes, Mrs. Smith, I'll be over Monday to fix your plumbing." "Well, I know it's frozen, but it is the weekend. I'll be there on Monday." "Yes, ma'am." And his wife says, "I thought you just told Sam you were going fishing on Monday." "Well, I am." "Well, why did you tell her?" "Oh, it'll hold her for the weekend. I'll think of something." You know, it just gets easier. Temptation is a little different now. That test at school is really important, and I don't know the subject as well as I ought to. And a few of those answers are written down on a little piece of paper, and they're put in my pocket. I haven't actually decided to cheat yet, but all through the exam, I think about that piece of paper. Should I get it out? You know, it's a big difference, really, passing or not passing, an A or a C. You know, the word temptation is not thumping rocks at pigs anymore. There's a fella sitting in his living room, shaking, and his friend from AA has been with him 2 days, helping him fight it. His wife's in the kitchen washing the dishes, and she's praying and crying into the sink. And the man is saying, "I'll never drink again. It's ruining me. I've lost my job. I'll never." But at the same time, he knows that out in the garage, in the toolbox, is a half pint. He's not thumping rocks. We're talking temptation. It gets easier, of course, to say yes when you should say no. After all, whose business is it anyway? But mine. It's such a small thing, it won't amount to anything, really. I mean, who's going to know? What difference does it make? I know people who never think about snatching a purse, but they don't mind tricking the insurance company. Oh, you know, there's no face, no name. Who gets hurt? I know people who would never think of going into their neighbor's garage and taking the mower or a wrench or just anything, but they won't lose a wink of sleep over fudging on the income tax. I mean, nobody gets hurt. I mean, we're not thumping pebbles anymore. And if you're willing to wade in that deep, I'm going to ask you to go into the deep end of the pool and listen to this text. Jesus is tempted. Ryan?
This text comes from Luke's Gospel, chapter 4. Jesus returned from the Jordan River full of the Holy Spirit and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. There he was tempted for 40 days by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and afterward Jesus was starving. The devil said to him, "Since you are God's son, command this stone to become a loaf of bread." Jesus replied, "It's written, people won't live only by bread." Next, the devil led him to a high place and showed him a single instant all the kingdoms of the world. The devil said, "I will give you this whole domain and the glory of all these kingdoms. It's been entrusted to me, and I can give it to anyone I want. Therefore, if you will worship me, it will all be yours." Jesus answered, "It's written, you will worship the Lord your God and serve only him." The devil brought him into Jerusalem and stood him at the highest point of the temple. He said to him, "Since you are God's son, throw yourself down from here, for it's written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you, and they will take you up in their hands so that you won't hit your foot on a stone." Jesus answered, "It's been said, don't test the Lord your God." After finishing every temptation, the devil departed from him until the next opportunity. Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and news about him spread throughout the whole countryside.
Thank you, Ryan. Now, I don't want the way the story is told to throw you off, to think of a caricature or a cartoon. You know, the devil said, and Jesus said, and the devil said. What do you see in your mind when you hear this passage read? If we were all given a piece of paper and I said, draw the text, would you draw a figure over here that's Jesus? And then would you draw another figure over here that maybe has a pitchfork and a tail in red? What would you draw? I'm reminding you that this is temptation. And if we make a cartoon out of it, it isn't really temptation. Even a person as weak as I am, if the devil came walking in looking like the devil, I could say, okay, give it your best shot. I think I can handle this, you know? It's when I don't know the difference between what I'm thinking and what the devil is thinking. That's when it gets tricky. If I were drawing this text, Jesus would be there alone, but not alone. Jesus would be the only one you would see. And don't let the fact that it's Jesus bother you. Some people are just uncomfortable with Jesus being tempted, but he was tempted in every way that we are, tested in every way that we are. You see, temptation is not a measure of your weakness. Temptation is a measure of your strength. The stronger you are, the more capable you are, the more opportunities you have, the more power you wield, the greater will be your temptation. My professor would say, you're not going to have a sea storm in a roadside puddle. Small person, small temptations. But Jesus, whoo, big storm. I mean, he's out there in that desert for 40 days, burning days, cold nights, 40 days fasting. Mark says that there were wild beasts and angels with him, which means tug, 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 tug. Now we're talking temptation. We're not thumping rocks at the pigs. We're not worried about German chocolate cake. We're not worried about telling a lie at school. We're not even thinking about alcoholism. What we're into is something deeper. Listen to it. Why don't you turn this stone into a loaf of bread? Well, that's very reasonable. He's hungry. He's the Son of God. Should he starve to death? Well, that makes sense. After all, Jesus, you've never worked a miracle yet. You know, you might want to just try one out here in the desert. You've never healed anybody. You might be embarrassed in front of your first crowd. You know, this makes sense. Jump off the pinnacle of this temple, the scripture says. You won't be hurt. Well, you know, if I did that, it would make a lot of people believe. I mean, they'd look at that and they'd really believe. I mean, what's wrong with doing something that increases faith? That just makes sense. And Jesus has shown all the kingdoms of the world. What if these were yours? Oh, wouldn't it have been wonderful if Jesus had said yes and had more influence on the social and political world that we live in? A little more justice and grace and equality? I mean, what if? That just makes sense to me. So what I want you to understand is that Jesus is approached and tested at the point of what is reasonable and what is helpful and what is good. Because fundamentally, temptation is not, would you like to do something wrong? When Adam and Eve are in the garden, the voice of the tempter says, wouldn't you like to be like God? The voice doesn't say, wouldn't you like to live like the devil? I've got a stack of cards and a fifth out back. It says, wouldn't you like to be like God? I mean, isn't that what we're all about? Temptation at its deepest level has nothing to do with apple pie, nothing to do with a piece of paper in the pocket with the answers, nothing to do with a half pint in the toolbox. Jesus' temptation is this: what am I going to do with my life? I was thinking about Ash Wednesday in Jerusalem several years ago. The Episcopal rector there said it first in Arabic and then in English. He said, "Remember, O woman, that you are dust, and to dust you shall return." Well, Ash Wednesday and this first Sunday of Lent are days to reflect on our mortality, to reflect on the brevity of this life that we lead. It has stayed in my mind all week as we prepare for this season, these 40 days and 6 Sundays before Easter. And even those of us who have lived into their 80s and 90s, life is so brief, such a brief thing from life to death. What are you going to do with it? That's the test. That's the test. We're not thumping rocks at pigs. What is my life anyway, if I were to sum it up? Have I decided that my life will have this integrity and everything that I do and say will be from here? And the wonderful thing about the gospel is that even if you've never thought about this before, it's not too late. Even if you've messed everything up, it's not too late. Even if you've spent 19 years in prison, it's not too late. Even if you doubt or don't believe a dang thing or lead with skepticism, it's not too late. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Still wet from your baptism, Jesus. What now? What now? Another story must begin. This is the cross. This is the intersection that all of us face, struggling with the will of God for our lives. And I have no plan to lay out, no suggestions for any of you. It comes from here. But I am going to make an assignment for Lent, for these 40 days in the wilderness. So I'm going to give you some homework. I want you to think during Lent about your 40 days in the wilderness, an essay, a composition, 25 words or less. And here's the title. This is who I am. This is what I do.